All right, here we go. With the possible exception of the Dallas Cowboys, I don't think there can be a fan base, not just in pro football, but in the world of sports right now, as upset as is the fan base of the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's gotten so bad that the phrase 9-8 is now a bad utterance on the banks of the Three Rivers. You're apparently soft if you think that that's good. The playoffs aren't good enough. The Steelers' glass, is it half empty? Or is it half full? Let's yins and yang it here, angel and devil and all of that from ESPN, a UNC grad who watched her heels play the Pitt Panthers on Tuesday night. She is the Steelers beat writer, brand new piece after a sit down with Art Rooney II. It's Brooke Pryor. How are you, Brooke?
I was doing a lot better before I watched my alma mater allegedly play basketball the other night. I That was an abomination. Naismith and Dean Smith are just doing somersaults in their graves right now.
Can't get any lower than losing to a team from Pittsburgh right now, because in the last several months, perhaps even years, things have gotten awfully dark there on the banks of the Three Rivers. And I mean, legitimately, I think we can call him a Pittsburgh institution at this point. He's been doing all great. He's been doing, I mean, all sorts of great work at every level for you. If you care about black and gold and Bobby Moe and all the rest of it, Breakfast with Benz at Trib Live and the Steelers Audio Network pregame show on WDVE, where you listen to me with Bauman and Crawford and everybody else there every Friday morning. He's Tim Benz. What's happening with you, pal? How you been?
Well, speaking of basketball optimism, I'm a Syracuse grad, so there's not much of that kicking around with me either. I'd rather be beaten by Pitt right now than I would Syracuse. Not that Brooke has anything to worry about there. When do they play again? Do they
Uh,
play
you
again
know,
this year?
I'm not sure. I prefer to just stick my head in the sand and leave it there until maybe April when it's all over and done with.
Well, if Syracuse loses to Pitt again in front of me at the Peterson Events Center, I'll stick my head in an oven, not in the sand. I'm pretty bleak about the whole situation right now. I'm looking to the Steelers to cheer me up when it
I,
comes to the offseason
That's
versus
bad.
Syracuse basketball. That's how bleak it's gotten.
I've only half joked, and it's because the percentage of how much of a joke it actually is at this point is altering with the day. But am I actually now looking to Paul Skeens and the Buccos for a ray of sunshine now on the Pittsburgh? I mean, that's how grim things are. Bury your head in the sand if you want. I don't think we can afford to do that. Certainly not the brain trust of the Pittsburgh Steelers right now, as they seek to at least bring a quarterback into into the franchise. Because as it is right now, Skylar Thompson notwithstanding, there are no answers at the most important position in sports. So let's start there here, and we'll angel and devil it, like I say. And Brooke, I'll start with you. Um, Before we get into specifically the quarterback situation going forward, who deserves the most credit for the 2024 Pittsburgh Steelers making the playoffs?
I gotta be honest, I was trying to prep for this and go through the options, and I am an eternal optimist. Fun fact, I won the Optimist Award at science camp in second grade. I really feel like they had to give a superlative to everyone and they just picked one
Oh, I
random.
did my research.
Yeah.
I didn't land on you happenstance. I
I
sought you out after I heard about that award.
I really, but here's the thing. As much as I try to be an optimist, the way that this season ended, I had to dig really deep and think who deserves credit for them getting to the playoffs, who was the difference maker in that first part of the season. Couple different solutions or half answers I landed on. Cam Hayward, because he played out of his mind all season, and to me deserves a lot of credit for even how the season ended. When they're losing, he was still the guy that's gutting it out, playing through the flu, everything else. And he's not even supposed to be doing what he's doing, coming
Hmm.
off of the injury. He is one of the last institution stalwarts of guys that remember this is the Steelers way. This is, the pomp and circumstance and pageantry. Like, and of course, all of this to say is like he's old. But to me, he deserves a ton of credit for navigating a lot of transitional time and getting them to that point. I think there's also a case to be made on the offensive side for Arthur Smith, which I can't believe I'm saying because the second half of the season, I think Arthur Smith deserves a ton of blame for how it ended. But when you look at the adjustments that he had to make in the first half of the season, going through a training camp where he thinks, okay, I'm going to be working with Russell Wilson, installing the system and schemes and plays and building up his confidence and all this stuff. Just kidding. He's sidelined. It's going to be Justin. So I'm going to pour everything into Justin, knowing that this system isn't going to be designed for Justin. It's for Russ, but I'll tailor it to Justin. He has a lot more upside. Okay, now it's going to be Russ starting. Just kidding. It's Justin. Like the way that he kind of managed that chaos and was able to, at least initially, get a lot out of Justin Fields and get a lot out of Russell Wilson in those first couple of starts. That's a tough job to do. And he does deserve a lot of criticism for some of the unimaginative offensive play that we saw, especially in the second half of the season, the stagnant run game, heave it down the field, see if Russ can hit a moon ball. But early on, I think that he deserves a lot of credit for at least getting them to the playoffs.
Well, I'm with you on Arthur Smith to the extent that losing him right now, had he left for a head coaching gig or otherwise, they would have really been even further jammed up than they already are. Because when you try to run a severe offense like Arthur Smith wants to run, it requires certain pieces that they went out and got for him. So if he walked out the door after only a year, they would have been in even, I suspect, a bigger bind than they are. But Benz, how say you then? Who's to blame for the Steelers losing 5 straight to close this season out and revealing what appears to be a gargantuan gap between them and the true contenders?
Can I just say the defense, or do I have to be more specific on the defense? Because collectively, I think it's
fair.
The defense. Because there are higher standards and expectations for the defense. There's more leaning on the defense. The way the offense is built to be a complement to a defense that keeps the other team within 24 points or less in most games. In a worst case scenario, the defensive ineptitude, the inability to get off the field in the Philadelphia game to the tune of only allowing their offense to have the ball for 20 minutes. The Baltimore game where Derrick Henry ran all over him. There were multiple times where we saw the opposing team have the ball for 35 minutes or more. The first quarter of that Bengals game at Acrisure Stadium at the end of the season was just dominated time of possession-wise by the Bengals. I think they had it for something like 13 minutes in that first quarter. So I think it's the defensive collective. And, I was thinking while Brooke was giving her answer about who should have gotten the most credit for them getting off to the 10-3 start, I was actually trying to choose between the defense and Russ, because the defense was very good in the first 6 weeks. The defense did its part as not just a complementary piece, but a engine driving piece to their 4 victories, I think, in the first 6 games. And then the ability to have a big boy passing game, or at least some semblance of it, for the middle part of the season when Russ came in was a wild card we haven't seen in a while. And I think that took them from, largely 4-2 to 10-3, based on the way that Russ performed. So, it's kind of funny because I think the two biggest reasons why they slumped so badly down the stretch were A, the defense was run all over, and then B, Russ went from not just a positive force on offense for his first 7 starts, to a real negative one where he had crucial turnovers that, for as bad as the defense was, would have made those games more palatable had he not thrown the interception against Kansas City, had he not thrown the pick 6 against Baltimore, had he not fumbled on the hit at the 4-yard line against Baltimore. So, and had so many 3-and-outs, as was the case in a lot of those games, to keep the defense on the field. So it's funny. I think the two best aspects of their team before the 5-game losing streak were the defense and Russ, and then I think those were the two worst angles to the 5-game losing streak to close it out.
It really is interesting. I mean, where Russ is concerned, and when he arrived as the starter and all of that after the injury and everything else, and Brooke touches on the whole springtime, and it wasn't 100% clear, but it certainly felt that way, that Russ was going to be the guy if he was right, no matter if Justin Fields was there or not. And I will always defer to you guys who are there and looking at practice every day and bouncing off of the guys in the locker room and otherwise, obviously I trust your eyes versus my ruminations and anybody else from a distance. Um, and I was consistently hearing Russ looks great in practice. There's not a debate if you see the two side by side, Fields and Russ in practice. And then with some success for Russ, Tomlin takes to the podium, and maybe one of the two of you asked the question about how did you know Russ was the right answer? And he said, that's why I get paid handsomely, or whatever he said. I guess first question is, did either of you have the temptation when Russ started to regress back to what Russ has been over the last decade or so? Did either one of you want to ask Tomlin, like, going to give some of that money back, coach? Because it doesn't seem like it was that great a call, as it turns out. Brooke.
So the person who asked Tomlin the question was Brandon Marshall, because he has the latitude to ask questions like that. I can't say
that's right. That's right.
Yeah, I can't say that either one of us would fire that one off in a post-game presser. That an intrusive thought did enter my mind of maybe we should fire off that question now of like, I don't, do you need to cut a check back to the organization? You know, I will say it's tough to watching the quarterbacks in practice is so weird, right? Because you're seeing them go against a dummy defense by and large. Like you're not going to get a real feel until you're in the game. But what I thought was interesting was that Russ did look good in practice. Justin made some really questionable decisions sometimes through a number of picks that Justin to me had more plays that you saw in practice of like, oh, that's why he's not the franchise quarterback in Chicago anymore. And you could see the moonballs in practice from Russ. And it's like, okay, man, maybe this guy still has it. But that's where I think that Justin has so much more untapped potential, because the thing that he is so good at, you can't really practice the athleticism, pull it down and run, like giving kind of what the defense is taking, what the defense is giving you in terms of what he can do on the ground. It's hard to simulate that in practice. With Russ, he is good at practice, and he knows that he's good at practice. He's been practicing his whole life to be good in practice.
He doesn't even need other people to do it, or even a ball. He just pretends he's throwing an imaginary ball, right?
He, like, every single waking moment is practice, and it's practicing in front of people. But toward the end of the season, like the practices at Acrisure Stadium before the playoff game, I just remember watching Russ and thinking, this is not good. Like he did not look good. I mean, he was making mistakes. He was throwing picks. Like the defense, I felt like the defense was going to put up a bigger fight based on what I was seeing in practice. It's hard to tell. Clearly it did not translate the same way, but I felt like Russ kind of went over a cliff at some point in the season in that 5-game losing streak. And he could just, no matter how much positivity he's preaching, the actions didn't back up the words. It felt like it just snowballed.
But here's the thing, Benz. If I can predict what is going to happen, what the defensive coordinators around pro football are going to do to offset what Russ has been doing successfully for a few weeks here, then surely Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith and the rest of that crew should have figured that out as well. But they plowed forward as though, I mean, there was buzz nationally, at least like, ooh, are the Steelers now a Super Bowl contender? I found that laughable in the moment. It was fine. Once again, they were exceeding some level of expectation, I guess. You know, the question, I think, Brooke, in fact, you asked Art to this question. I take it to you, Benz. Does Mike Tomlin still resonate? I think of it more in this way. Does Mike Tomlin understand where we are in pro football? I feel like in the last few days since the season ended, the notion like we cannot band-aid the most important position anymore. We must go and get a young guy. I feel like for years now, since Roethlisberger's elbow injury, he's been under the impression I can knuckleball these games up. I can dirty these games up enough and get to double-digit wins every year and get to the playoffs and make some hay. He's been right up until the end part. That is not a working strategy against great teams. Certainly not 2 or 3 times to get to the Super Bowl. And witness, they haven't even won a single game doing that. So, how say you with that mouthful of nonsense I just threw at you?
Well, it's not nonsense because it's true. I mean, that's exactly been the formula, and it's exactly been the problem. Because the defense has as much frontline talent as it does, they're good enough to mask the offense's problems, especially early in seasons, to the point that they are going to be a 9-win team. And they've always had enough of a semblance of a running game and maybe enough complementary parts on offense that they can get 21 points in a game where the other team is held to 19, 10 times out of 17 opportunities. That's generally been the formula. But like you said, especially in the AFC now with the depth of quarterbacking that they face, the formula to get beyond that is not good enough. And the other thing that I think we've really got to address as it relates to the defense being the crucial part of that calculus, always being the better unit of the two, or more oftentimes than not, the better unit of the two, is that unit tends to erode as the season goes along. Whether it's cataclysmic injury to TJ Watt, cataclysmic injury to Cam Hayward that we have seen from both of those guys separately in recent seasons, multiple minimal injuries to Minkah Fitzpatrick like we saw last year, not this most recent season, but the year before, or just they're tired and beat up and it's 17 long friggin' weeks. That defense never looks the same in December as it did in September. And it's because they're fast, they're flying around, they're coming out of camp strong, they got off-season legs, they don't have nicks and dings and swollen ankles and sore joints, and it's easier to get loose in September than it is in December, and it's 2 degrees outside. It's the defense, in my opinion, just can't hold up over 17 weeks, and especially when you sprinkle in the issue as well of how predictable that defense is. I mean, you talk to the tape gurus and the film guys who study this a lot closer than I do, and the amount of times that they're in their ostensibly their base, their nickel, like when they were playing nickel and dime as much as they were against the Ravens, and the Ravens were still running all over them, like, get out of it. And they never did. And Henry was still all just running it down their throats. And it was frustrating to hear how many times you'd hear all these guys who really break down the numbers of what kind of defensive look that they're in, and where TJ Watt comes from in pass rush opportunities, and how infrequently he moves around, and how infrequently they blitzed, where I thought they had 3 inside linebackers that allowed themselves to blitz more this year. They never took advantage of that, and they so rarely did anything intricate with Fitzpatrick this year, even when Elliott was healthy. Being that vanilla on defense, along with it getting eroded physically as the season goes along, it just augments how easy it is to take advantage of the offense, because the defense isn't the weapon once it gets out there that it used to be.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's overall an indictment of Mike Tomlin, who is supposed to be a defensive whiz, and everything is built around that. His entire approach is around the defense and everything else. And it's not dominance on the level of, keeping your opponents to 9 points a game. It's, creating a couple of turnovers, winning the turnover battle, all of that kind of stuff that makes the difference. But it also, the indictment of Tomlin to me, Brooke, is at this point is, like I say, the last, say, 20 or so games, I've gotten a different vibe. In fact, you were also the person who asked Tomlin the question that caused him to storm off the podium in Buffalo last January. It's the way last season ended, and there's a certain swagger that Tomlin exhibited once they got Russ, as though all that ails us is now been purged. It was that quarterback room's fault that things didn't go as good. Now we have a grown-up in the quarterback room, and now we're going to be right as rain to get Kenny right. Oh, Kenny doesn't want to stay here. Okay, now we got Justin Fields. Now we've upgraded that. Oh, we're leaps and bounds better than we were a few minutes ago. Now you're going to see what we're all about. That is what I get from Tomlin at the podium. I sensed that he thought this thing was going way further than I sort of felt like it was going. And I'm not saying that 2020 hindsight. I was saying that in the win streak. Like, how far do you think you're running with Russell Wilson and this team overall? I also think there is blame, obviously, to be placed on the guy with the cool nickname, Omar Khan. I mean, you went into a season on purpose with Van Jefferson as a starting wide receiver. That's not Van Jefferson's fault. That's Omar Khan's fault that you thought you could get away with doing something like that in 2024. Um, so I'm is it so I'm trying to like glass half full it. Does Tomlin deserve some praise for not publicly saying what we all understand? It's like, what do you want us to do? Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen can't beat Patrick Mahomes either, if you haven't noticed. They have their fancy QBs, and it hasn't made a difference for them either. But I think he understands. Now he's masked it however he can, and now has had to come to Jesus season with it's not just a good and experienced quarterback. We need a great high-end talent at the start of his professional career, and we have to go get that. How say you?
I want to be glass half full about Mike Tomlin and the direction and what he could have learned from this last season so badly. I do think that he deserves credit for not only this last season, but the last couple of seasons getting to the playoffs or getting close to the playoffs, even in Kenny's
last six. I'll do you one better, Brooke. I praise him, and then
yes.
people get confused. Oh, you Tomlin can do no wrong in your book. No. I'm saying has done wrong, but it is nevertheless remarkable. Andy Reid,
Right.
Bill Belichick, and otherwise could not get this team to as many playoff appearances as Mike Tomlin just did with what they have at quarterback. That anyway,
Exactly.
I
No,
just wanted to
exactly.
accentuate.
Remind me of that. I'm going to counter that in a minute, but go ahead. Go
Okay.
ahead.
I I think that he is really good at looking at a pantry and seeing all of these random ingredients and whipping up a five-course meal that you've never tasted before. That's like the most incredible thing you've ever had. And you're like, how in the world did you do this? You had like some curry paste, red pepper flakes, flour, and like some random vegetables and a pasta. And like, I mean, he is
Veggie
literally,
masala, I think you just described, right? I
he
think that's what you just
basically
made. I'm not sure, Benz, but
he goes into every season like he's competing on Chopped and has a mystery basket and is like, what do I have? I've got 17 games to try to make the playoffs and get to the finals. And he does a great job. The thing is, it's not a mystery basket. He is the one that's going grocery shopping.
Yep.
Like
It
this
has to
is
be
the
remembered.
that's the root of all of these problems is that if he was in an organization that said, Mike, I want you to stay in your office and I want you to figure out a better system. I want you to go into the locker room and talk to these guys and rally them and go out to practice and coach the guys that are out there. We'll ask you when we're between a couple players and we want to hear your input, but you don't get to have the final say. You don't get to have almost what feels like unchecked power that feels even more unchecked since Kevin Colbert retired. It feels like this is Mike Tomlin's show. In a lot of ways, he creates the problem and then he solves it, and then he gets credit for solving it without a lot of acknowledgement that, like, well, you're in this problem because you had a hand in it.
Yeah, it's kind of like we always hear this, Dave, about how he always gets the ship to shore. The problem is he's also the one that ran it into an iceberg.
yeah,
Yes.
you built the ship, man. Right. Exactly.
100%.
That
And I
he's
think
I've never seen a fireman get so much credit for starting so many fires.
yes, it's true. And the thing that I keep coming back to, the idea that I keep kind of rolling around in my head that I think is Mike Tomlin's biggest problem and the organization's biggest problem is that for a guy who wants his brand to be, we don't seek comfort, I don't seek comfort, he is too comfortable. The Steelers are too comfortable. They're too comfortable in doing things the way they've always been done and giving the same message every year. And yeah, maybe that message is the one that is being received and guys are listening to it, but it's the wrong message. It's being comfortable in we've had all this success. We don't want to spend a lot of money. We're going to go bargain bin shopping and it's worked before, so it's going to work again. But like the before is getting farther and farther away. No one is really challenging him or has the ability to challenge him. And so he just keeps becoming more and more insulated. And it's hard who can say something to, kind of
That happens. That
make
is
them
the celebrity
comfortable.
effect. The higher up you get and
Yes.
the longer you live in that, the fewer people tell you no and you're wrong. And the more you get that power and can eliminate those people. I get all that. Um, Go ahead, Ben. You had something to say
Yeah,
there.
a couple things. First of all, I forgot to mention when you brought up the issue of turnovers. You brought up turnovers. That's something else that betrayed the defense by the end of the season
Yeah.
last year. They were very turnover reliant. Turnovers are fickle. If they don't get turnovers and sacks, they're just not a very good defense because, to go back to the previous point, they're vanilla. I forgot to reference that. They stopped getting turnovers. They stopped getting sacks, which is not something we're used to seeing. And that's part of the reason why the defense looks so bland. And again, part of not getting sacks is going up against better quarterbacks. Better quarterbacks know where they're going before the pass rush even
You
starts.
cannot always play. This is my lament with the Tomlin's approach is always, and you're old enough, Ben, you're not Brooke, but we're old enough to remember watching Big Eight football when you would hear the analysts say unironically during the game, like, hey, this Oklahoma juggernaut, the only thing is they're not built to come from behind. Like in the NFL in the 21st century, that cannot be your limitation on offense. You cannot
Yeah.
be like, hey, as long as we have the lead in the second half, our defense will get after it. It's like, well, you're not always going to have the lead there, coach. That's not going to be a winning strategy for you against good teams, to your point, Benz.
But the other thing you brought up about Belichick and Reed, what would they have done with the Steelers quarterback situation? Would they have ever gotten a team that the Steelers have had into the playoffs as frequently as Tomlin has? Well, Belichick won a playoff game with Vinny Testaverde back when. Belichick, if there had been 7 seeds in 2008 as opposed to
It's
6,
fair.
would have gotten into the playoffs with Matt Castle. Andy Reid was doing well, but not great with Alex Smith. So, I don't think Tomlin is alone to be praised for making chicken salad out of chicken scratch with the quarterback position. But again, the way he has co-signed, been a part of whatever process has gone into preparing the team for the post Big Ben era, it's not like Kevin Colbert said, hey, Mike, we're taking Mason Rudolph in round 3 and we've got a first round grade on him because I say so. Mike was part and
That's right.
parcel involved in that decision. He signed off on Mitch Trubisky being the guy to replace Roethlisberger.
That's right.
It wasn't just Art being afraid of reliving the Dan Marino thing or Colbert having an agenda to leave the Steelers a quarterback so they overvalued Pickett. Mike was part of that too. Mike could have pushed for Russell Wilson 2 years before they got him when the Broncos decided to do it. They just wanted to do it cheaper when the Broncos were still paying for him 2 years later. So, and Justin Fields, I get it why they wanted to get rid of Kenny, but he wanted Justin Fields. So, like, everybody who's been here, Mike has had his hands on. Mike has
Absolutely.
sprinkled the pixie dust, the Tomlin pixie dust, on every decision that has involved quarterbacks with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I would even go so far as to say I'm sure he co-signed on Ben for one more year too. So, like, to what degree all these things come into play, I really don't know between him and Kevin and Rooney. But these decisions, these big decisions about quarterbacks, not one of those guys is going to shove something down Mike Tomlin's throat that he's not comfortable with.
I completely agree with you, and it is weird how people sort of keep those in separate silos, as though Mike Tomlin is not the architect of that. He is not. Oh, bottom line, he is Omar Khan's boss. Omar Khan is not telling him, like, here's your roster, coach, go do the best you can with it. This is what I'm giving you this year.
Dave, what the column I always want to write, this is the column I want to write. I want the Steelers to go to the Super Bowl so badly so that on the Sunday morning of the Super Bowl, a column can go up on Trib Live with my byline on it, and the headline says, Mike Tomlin had nothing to do with this. Because anytime something goes wrong, Mike Tomlin had nothing to do with this. So I guess when things go right, it's all because of what Omar Khan did. It's all because of what the players did. It's all because of what Art Rooney did as an owner. Because we always want to disassociate Tomlin from blame, but whenever things go right, it's Mike Tomlin laying hands and making this pile of crap into a playoff contender. We always do that.
I agree, but it's because it's the special. Maybe you disagree with my larger point about only Tomlin could have gotten these Steelers teams in the last 6 years to the playoffs. Okay. All right. It's a very short list, at least. It's maybe it is Andy Reid and Bill Belichick, and that's about it. Maybe, I don't know, O'Connell or one of the offensive whizzes out there could cook something up for one season's worth of success. But it is Tomlin, to your point, that I completely agree with you about, is like, he is the defense first. He is the one selecting the pieces. He has 2 future Hall of Famers in Cam Hayward and TJ Watt, Minka Fitzpatrick, perennial All-Pro, some very nice pieces, no clear-cut weakness on that defense, maybe slot corner. But in the age of free agency, the 31 other teams also have some deep flaws on their rosters, including the Kansas City Chiefs on down. They have all those pieces on defense, and it hasn't amounted to them getting anywhere close. So that approach doesn't work. The bigger damnation I can deliver on Tomlin and everyone else there, this side of Arthur Smith, is they all, to your point, Benz, they all last year, 2023, sat in there and didn't know, after Mitchell Trubisky struggles repeatedly and Kenny Pickett struggles, they still didn't know until they absolutely had no other place to turn that Mason Rudolph was the best quarterback in the quarterback room. Now we're trusting them to make the right call on quarterback. Right. That's why I said last March, this is a bad move to go get Russ. Maybe you think he's like Goldilocks, like just the right amount of challenge for the kid. Brooke, you and I talked about that right after the deal. To me, I think maybe I'm looking for things to be true that aren't actually true. I know they like Cam Ward. I think that's the move. I think you go all the way up, and the jive about that's not something the Steelers do. Obviously, they do these things now that they didn't do 25 years ago. It's reasonable to think that they would trade all the way up to number 1. Tennessee wants to get multiple players. This is the time to do it. This jive of, let's wait for Arch Manning. The path to that, if he is the real deal, no one's giving up the top picks that you can cobble together some other stuff for down the line kind of picks. But at the same time, Aaron Rodgers ain't the answer at this point. Like,
Brooke is shaking your head no. If you're shaking your head no because you don't see the Steelers doing it, or are you shaking your head no?
Why is that just an out of bounds thought, Brooke?
Because I don't know that I see Cam Ward as the franchise guy. I don't see any quarterback in this class worth selling the farm for.
People keep saying, I know this is what people keep saying, but this wait till next year kind of philosophy. 3 years ago, it was in 2021, don't take Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis or any of those guys. Wait till next year when you can get Sam Howell or Spencer Rattler. I can make the case, a pale case, but I can make one that at least they got the Kenny Pickett experience out of the way a year earlier than going through it with one of those guys the next year.
No, it sounds like you want to have a Kenny Pickett experience again. Like
I want them to go after what they need, which is a quarterback. You're nowhere if you don't get a high-end QB.
But I don't know that they would go anywhere next year anyway, to the point of, well, if Lamar Jackson can't beat Patrick Mahomes, like, what tells you that someone on the Steelers in 2025 can? I think there is, and here's the thing, this is what the Steelers simply will not do. Like, this is more insane than telling them to trade the farm to get Cam Ward. What they should do, if I'm running things, I'm signing Justin Fields, maybe I draft a guy 3rd round at the absolute highest, but like I take a flyer on somebody in a mid to late round. And I don't spend a lot on guys that I think are going to contribute right away. I am building everything for 26. I kind of want to tank in 25
Hmm.
because the quarterback class that's coming, great. Luck into having an Arch Manning. Like
You don't have to tank. It can happen naturally.
it can that also. Like if I think that you do
Well, you
not
can
go out
trade. That's
trade.
the option C that people leave out all the time. It's like they just got to bottom out. It's just not going to happen. They're not going to go 3-14. They can go
It's not
7-10, but they can't get. They're not going to be so crummy with the guys they have on that roster that they're just going to fall so that they're going to have one of those years that's going to naturally place them. They're going to have to trade up, but that's not the end of the world. Teams do that when they
Well,
decide
so let's say
now we
you're
got to
right. Let's
do it.
say
We
you're
got to
right,
I
and
move.
they are 7-10. It's a hell of a lot easier to trade up from seven
yes.
and ten than it is
Okay,
10-7. And like
sure.
the analogy that you brought up about the Kenny situation 2 years ago, the difference between that and Cam Ward is Kenny fell to them. They
Right.
didn't have to do anything to take Kenny; they just took him. Um, Maneuvering and using future assets to go up to get Cam Ward to me is unnecessary. I'm more of Brooke's school of thought, which is whether it happens by way of intentionally tanking and like, I don't know, going out there with Kyle Allen as your starting quarterback at opening day, which to me would connote.
That's how you tank is you start a
But you
deficient
could
guy,
Skylar
right?
also you could
Thompson,
also
step right
sign
up.
Justin Fields for a very manageable contract
Right.
and go and be 6-10, or sorry, 6-11 or 7-10, and that could be organic. You could still try to win, and that might be the only way to try to win right now because there's nothing out there in terms of trade or in terms of signing a quarterback of any repute that I think would be intelligent for the future and also help you win now. Like
Yeah.
the only argument I guess you could provide aside from that would be Darnold. But like, when we were talking about what could Coach X do with this quarterback, like I don't know if Jared Goff or Sam Darnold wins them a playoff game the last 2 or 3 years either here in Pittsburgh. I don't know that.
And I don't know
Agree.
there is a quarterback out there right now like a better option than what they just had. This is the year to say wait until next year. I also don't know that they have the ability at this point in time to develop a quarterback, to go up and get Cam Ward and then prove to me that you can develop him into being your franchise guy. Take Sam Darnold and continue the development that he showed for 90% of the season in Minnesota. Like, did Mason Rudolph develop because of what the Steelers did, or did he just mature and get a little bit older and eventually play at something close to a starting quarterback level when everybody else fell apart? Like, Mitch Trubisky didn't improve. No one has gotten into the Steelers system and improved recently. Is that
Well, that's been the
why
buzz
is
of a big bit of hand wringing these last few days has been about the size of the coaching staff. Pittsburgh has a small one compared to the rest of the league. And people point at the Rooney family and say they don't want to pay money. They are one of the old school operations. The business is the football team. There's not billions of dollars in tech flowing in. It's because of the Pittsburgh Steelers that the Rooneys have money to pay the Pittsburgh Steelers. Um, so I kind of get it. Um, to me, you said it though, Brooke. Ben's the answer is right now, short of, and even if they do trade all the way up to get Cam Ward, which, if I'm being realistic, I don't think is going to happen. I'd be fine with it. I get the knocks on him, but it's that it's that sort of like enemy of the good. Perfect is the enemy of the good. It's like Cam Ward would be a very good quarterback. Daniel Jeremiah has him as his third overall prospect, regardless of position and everything else. It would be an upgrade for them to get Cam Ward. Short of that happening, though, Justin Fields, 2 years for $30 million. Somebody else is going to offer him the $10 million annual thing. I don't think is going to come true. Is that the best option? Do you agree with Brooke there, Benz? For
The,
2025
the,
is to roll with Fields?
yeah, I do. I do. Because let me throw one caveat on that. He's the best option to roll with if they actually treat him like a starting quarterback.
Hmm.
They treated him like a babysitter for the offense for the first 6 weeks. They didn't even trust him to do his best asset, which is design plays for him to run, because
I
they were
agree.
afraid of getting him hurt over the first 6 weeks until Russ came back. Although, and again, I think this is, hindsight is 2020 here, but if they had done that, then I think Russ was probably ready to come back a couple weeks earlier. Like, Russ could have come back a couple weeks earlier than what he did. They had the luxury of getting off to a good start and Fields being okay. So, if Kyle Allen had been the next option, he was no good and he really stunk. I think they could have gotten Russ in there earlier than they did. But they just kind of babied the whole situation with Fields, and I think that was part of the issue with Trubisky and Pickett as well. You just can't go into a game and say the best possible outcome is no interceptions. It's also got to be 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, that's got to be part of it.
It
like,
is.
just escaping. If every drive ends with going, whoo, no interceptions, that's a winner. No, it's not. After a while, no, it's not. You can't beat the Broncos 10-9 every week. With Bo Nix, who was probably babied early, but not so much later. You've got to let Fields go to the line of scrimmage and say, they're going to kill this, whether it's run play that we came in with or my run check 2. All right, because that even Fields said that during the year.
Watch how decisive the trick with Jaden Daniels is. Like, people love to do that thing. Like, Justin Fields could do that, and on some level, Justin Fields is physically capable of some of those things. It's not a half a beat. It's much faster than that. But watch how decisive Jaden Daniels is. When he decides I'm taking off, it happens in the blink before you can blink your eyes. Justin Fields, you feel the weight of like, well, Coach T did tell me to take care of the ball. You feel that, and that's hampering what he can do. I always say, I've been saying lately through these playoffs, it's a weird station we've reached at. It's fun that Dan Campbell has his foot on the gas all the time, because everybody else, all the other contenders, are being told basically, don't get drunk. Just play real sober like. Don't turn the ball. Hey, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. Yeah, we know you're superheroes who can do things that no other human being could ever do. Don't do those things, because they can imperil our
Justin
chances
Fields
here.
play at .07
You're right.
BAC.
It's got to be in between. It's got to be right, but it's in between. It's right. It's finding
Let
that
Justin
balance.
play buzzed then. I don't want to get in trouble here. I was in Students Against Drinking and Driving too, but let Justin play buzzed. Like, let him get to the line of scrimmage and occasionally say, that's not going to work. I'm going to call an audible here, which he was not allowed to do.
Right.
Neither was Kenny, and to a certain degree, I don't think Mitch was either. He needs to have autonomy and be told he's the starter and act like it, because Jaden Daniels, part of the reason he's that proficient at just seeing what's happening and going is he doesn't feel the weight of the bench behind him if he screws up once.
Man,
Right.
that is exactly right, though. That's what Coach T with the rhetoric sounds great, and it's ironic that he's the one who's the standard is the standard, and we don't live in our fears. Except, yeah, you want to win games 38-0 every week, Coach, like every other team does, but you don't approach games that would allow for that to ever happen, or very often. Every game is going to be a 12-11 final score because of the way you approach it. How say
Well,
you?
it goes back into the comfort thing. It's all about staying comfortable. Don't get out of his comfort zone. And I think that going back to what Benz is saying about tell him that he's the starter, give him the autonomy. Give that to these guys when you are signing or drafting them. Like, when you acquire a guy in free agency or the draft, cut the BS about it's an open competition. We're going to have them fight all the way through camp and preseason, all of this stuff.
Well, that's what he did with Russ. He had to have told Russ that, because of the comportment of Russ v. Fields. It was always clear. Like, I don't care whatever you say about the open competition.
Right.
It's pretty obvious based on your actions that you're going with Russ if he's healthy.
And but I just,
Which was silly.
Right. It's silly. It is treating these players and media and fans like children in a lot of ways.
It's like, hey, I saw you have that drink. That is what it is about. Sobriety. It's about, like, don't do anything that might break something. Like, I mean, you see these other teams tracking up into the 30s.
Right.
Actually, though, see, it does kind of like the rest of the league has kind of regressed a little bit because all those teams, McDermott is saying, or Harbaugh is now saying like, dang, Lamar turned the ball over twice. That never did that all season long, and that's what undid our season for us. So it's only going to deepen this need to just don't do anything that might mess things up kind of mentality that plagues most of pro football these days. This side of Dan Campbell.
I feel like, and this is probably oversimplifying it, but I think that there needs to be, this team needs to give, and Mike Tomlin needs to give his quarterbacks more autonomy and more public confidence. Like you might be telling them behind the scenes, like, I believe in you and everything else. These guys are only human, right? Like you can hear what your coach is saying, but you go out into the real world and everyone is debating who should it be, who's better. And like, you have to keep reminding yourself. It's like when you have a secret boyfriend, but he's actually out here, like when somebody's on The Bachelor and the show is airing and you already know that you won, but you can't tell anybody else that you won. And you're having to see all of these online discussions and everything of like, oh, it looks like he has a better connection with this person. Maybe it's this person, but like, it's really you. And then you start second guessing, like, well, shoot, should it really be me? Like, but maybe he did have a better connection with that person over there. Like, I'd like to know, and maybe this is something I end up researching. How far did the teams who had quarterback competitions through camp, how far did they go? When there's an open competition, this could also speak to a lot of other variable factors going on with these teams, but how successful were the teams that had an open competition? How soon were jobs assigned and given out? And like
there wasn't another one in the AFC. I'm just going through in my head right now. I mean,
like Jaden Daniels. Right. And Jaden Daniels, I want to say I can't remember when he was named starter, but I
mean, like Russ, I guess probably the best good example of what you're getting at is Russ beating out Matt Flynn by the end of training camp back in whatever that was, 2011-ish.
Right. But like it's changed now. This is such a quarterback league. The longer you take, the more discussion you have about who should be the starter, whether it's external or internal, the more you're mucking it up. Like you need to keep the main thing.
The process that they go through is all. I mean, the tedious sort of like Roman Wilson isn't ready for the field yet. It's like you understand it's free agency. You only control him for a few more years, man. Speed this thing up here. Like they don't. Right. Their philosophy feels outmoded with that. Listen. I have, speaking of going on too long, I've held you guys up way too long. I would love to do a deep dive on the upcoming season of The Bachelor, the rest of the ACC, basketball season, all the rest of it. But enough's enough already. I don't want to hold you up any further. I like this, though. I got to tell you, I enjoyed it. Yins and Yang. Did you like it? Benz, was it all right for you?
I don't think that Brooke was any more angelic than I was, honestly.
I know. I think
that's on you, Ben. You should have been a lot more negative.
I should have been more devil. Okay, all right.
I think it could be a yins and y'all. I think that we could tweak it a little bit. A yins and y'all. I feel like I had a lot of bless their hearts in this. Like I'm going to be positive, but I'm really being negative. I had big bless your heart energy for the Steelers organization and where they are right now.
I like that. And that reminds me that we share an affinity for Bojangles. When you start getting Caroline on me, you remind me of that. That's something someday maybe Benz will get to learn about. In the meantime, you filled
we got
the
Cane's
list.
we have Cane's right outside of the radio station now. So that's sort of one-stop shopping for everybody.
It's all right. It's good. It's not.
There's also Permanis too, Dave. So, if you actually come to the station and visit Randy and those guys, you have multiple choices.
That's another subject that we'll get into on the next Yins and Y'all. But the Pittsburgh-based creepos who have to announce that they don't like Permantes and that it's overrated. Well, to what end? Is that what you're trying to do, Brooke? Is that what I heard a noise out of you when Permantes was mentioned? Like, it's too much to hear about a sandwich that has French fries and coleslaw on it. It's delicious. What's the bellyache about?
If everything was all warm at once, great. but it.
You wouldn't want the coleslaw warm. You wouldn't want the bread warm. You want the.
But I don't want my
what makes
fries
it
to be
delicious.
soggy, and you can't have it all. It doesn't work for me, regrettably.
Now this is over. Now that's it.
I'm so sorry.
Now we'll see you in Chapel Hill. Me I'm bringing Jalen Lowe and all the Ish, all of them. We're all coming down there, and we're going to repeat what you saw in the Pete a couple of nights ago. In the meantime, Brooke Pryor, make sure you track down her piece on that sit down that she, Benz, and the rest of the crew just had with Art 2 on ESPN. Benz.
Oh, I wasn't there. That was Joe Rutter. Joe Rutter carried the ball for us there. There was a one person per outlet deal. I was just listening at home like everybody else. So.
And like I say, Benz is legitimately prolific. Make sure you're tracking all his great work down at Trib Live. Breakfast with Benz, the Steelers Audio Network pregame show on DVE. Let's do it sooner rather than later again, Yins.
You got it.